Vă salutăm la încă o ediție a Forumului Dialogos. De data aceasta sunt invitat gazdă și am alături de mine un invitat. Suntem în Cluj, în cadrul Bisericii Via, aici unde vom filma această discuție. Însă de data aceasta aș vrea să avem o discuție despre starea Bisericii, atât în Statele Unite, cât și vom arunca un punct de vedere asupra stării Bisericii în România. Îl avem ca invitat alături de noi pe Mike Woodruff, care este păstor principal al Bisericii Christ Church, care are o calitate deosebită și anume este un multi-site church. Mai multe locații conduse de diferiți păstori în ceea ce se numește zona de nord a Chicagoului. Legătura lui cu mulți păstori în lume este făcută prin ceea ce se numește Renew Communities, dar și faptul că este președinte al Scholars Leaders International. Această organizație este cea fondată de către cel pe care îl cunoaștem ca fiind John Stott și are grijă să investească în păstori care își doresc să studieze mai mult la nivel academic. Așadar, vom muta discuția în limba engleză, urmând ca dumneavoastră fie să o înțelegeți, fie să urmăriți subtitrele de aici încolo. Mike, welcome to Romania. We are very pleased to have you here as a guest in our conversation today. Forumul Dialogos is a setup in which we have serious conversations on several topics of interest for our communities. Therefore, you, as a lead pastor of a multi-site church in Chicago, various experiences in training pastors and helping others being trained through the organization of John Stott, I think you have a tremendous experience and knowledge from which we can learn. Thank you very much for being here and accepting to be our guest.
Oh, it's great to be here. I look forward to our conversation.
It's amazing how things are being brought together by God, and I think you traveling to Romania, knowing and having so much experience in the US, makes you a valuable guest for us. Not only that you are a lead pastor of a church, but through your relationship with John Stott, you have some serious experiences that we can learn from. Please give us a bit of an insight on how that happened and what does it mean.
We've all learned from John Stott. He was obviously such a seminal figure for the church in the 20th century. I learned from John from his books and hearing talks, and then I became involved with the group initially in the late 90s. Sherry and I, my wife and I, have been involved been on the board or supporting John Stott. Initially it was called Christian International Scholarship Foundation. It's now called Scholar Leaders, for 30 plus years. So it was John's vision that the church was the vehicle. It was God's plan A. And in order to grow the best churches, you needed strong pastors. And in order to have strong pastors, they needed books and they needed faculty to develop. You need wise, godly faculty to cultivate and mentor pastors. And so he invested in people that were going to write the books and that were going to teach the classes. So that was sort of the backdrop of Langham. Scholar Leaders became sort of the U.S. offshoot when John was funding people from the book royalties of his ministry almost exclusively in Europe. Two of his study assistants started to do the same thing, raise money to help fund people in the United States. Both organizations now, Scholar Leaders and Langham, are funding people all over the world. Sister organizations partner together. And so I got involved as a board member, and then for 13 years was the president of Scholar Leaders. And it's been one of the great joys of my life, and brought me to Romania early on because we had some Romanian scholars that we were funding, and so.
Yes, I was going to bring it up. I'm sure you've seen quite a few Romanian names on your list of funding.
Yes,
we are thankful as a country and as a Christian community for investing on so many Romanian pastors that actually came back to Romania, and now they shape the minds of our community. That's an amazing gift for us, and thank you very much. There is something in your bio that caught my attention, and I think that has to do a lot with the future of the church in Romania based on the experience of the past in the US, and that's lead pastor of a multi-site church. Now, Romania now develops more on the urban areas, And we see some churches growing, which struggle to fit all their people in the same building. This is one of the cases. So would you please give us a bit of a backdrop to what that multi-site church means and how that looks like?
Yep. So let me start by saying, maybe I'll apologize for whatever we're sending your way. It's not always the best. And as a U.S. pastor who is pastored outside of Chicago in a very unique setting, a very specific setting, I feel like those who are pastoring in Romania bring a lot more understanding of hardship or suffering. Obviously, in the communist era, Ceausescu era, consequently have a greater maybe resilience. So I'm not sure how much of what we do works. I think we have much to learn from you. That said, you've asked about multi-site. We stumbled into multi-site when it was somewhat of perhaps a church planting model. So in the United States, I can't speak for other places, but in the United States, 85% of church plants failed within 4 years. They didn't make it. And they cost lots more money than to do a second site. So a multi-site church says, we're one church, we have one statement of faith, one mission, one vision, one staff, one budget. We are one church. We just happen to meet in multiple locations. And we're going to do that in a variety of means. Sometimes it's by video preaching, sometimes it's by team preaching, but we are going to be one church. And so we're going to have central services that handle a lot of what needs to be handled and develop the resources for the same church to meet in multi-sites. So we have 4 sites. We were tapping out our campus, and a church that was failing, a physical church that was failing, came to us and said, we need help. There was about 20 people. They were in their 80s. And they said, we're about to close. And after discussions, we said, well, we'll send people your way. I traveled there to preach for the next 3 years in between services. But you're joining us. Like it's a merger, but it's really an acquisition. It's going to be our elder board, our staff, our strategy, but we'll come and we'll send people and we'll send some resources, some finances. We'll fix up this facility. And so that's what we did. And then we did 2 others since then.
That sounds amazing. Probably untangible for us in Romania, because that takes a lot of humbleness to say we are failing and we need help. So that should bring a new perspective on what church is, not necessarily a new method. So we have these differences between what a perspective is on church and what the method we do church is, which some work in the US, others don't work in Romania.
Right.
Should we gear our conversation towards what church is,
sure,
and how we define church and move from there on?
Sure. I do think we have to go back to the mission, and we're asking questions for which I wouldn't claim that we have definitive answers about what method, what structure we're going to operate in. There's advantages to all kinds of churches, big and small and multi-site and single site, and there's pros and cons to each model. And the question obviously is, are we being faithful to what God has called us to do? Are we making disciples? Are we seeing God's kingdom expand? So.
Yeah, I think making disciples changes the conversation. When that is the problem, that means that we have to evaluate what church is through a different lens. So going back to the big C church, that's where I'm trying to bring the conversation, because I don't think that the US teaching or the Romanian teaching is different. Let's tackle on that.
Well, so the church is I mean, the Greek word ecclesia first emerges in Peter's confession. Jesus asks, who do people say that I am? And Peter says, well, some say Elijah, John the Baptist, whatever. And Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And he says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus says, Peter, I know you didn't come up with that on your own. You're blessed. God obviously has given you got that information from the Father. And then he says, on that foundation, I'm going to build my church. And he pulls this term out of sort of Greek political thought. The term had fallen out of favor. And he then claims the term and then shapes it. So the church, whatever else the church is, it's Christ's idea, right? We don't get to decide what the church is or what the church's mission is. It's Christ's church. We serve Christ's church, and he has the mission and the mandate, and it is to be the visible expression. We would say that the church's mission at Christ Church. We talk about the church's mission is to proclaim the good news and engage in good works. We're to proclaim the gospel. We're to be the people who follow Jesus, who are called out to be the advanced team of Jesus, bringing his kingdom on earth.
This sounds amazing. And when we speak the same language, when we hear you speaking like that in a church setting, we all agree that's the truth. Now, what I see more and more is a disengagement with the institution of the church on one hand. And on the other hand, we see a dechurching generation. And the thing we hear more and more is the church is a mess. I don't want to have anything to do with the church, based on history and actual scandals that we see all over the social media. What would you say to someone who clearly states as an obstacle to coming to faith that the church is a mess?
Well, the church is a mess. And I think we need to own some of our mistakes. And obviously when we talk about the mistakes of the church, it's the Crusades and the Inquisition and
history,
sexual scandals and those things. And I think we need to say, the church is made up of very broken people. And I don't believe that the church is made up of better people. When I talk with on our street, it's a little bit like the UN. There's Indians and Russians and Ukrainians, and when I talk with a Muslim from Turkey or a Hindu from India, I don't believe I'm necessarily a better person than they are, smarter or a better father or better husband. I'd like to think I am, but I also know how broken we are, and so I think we need to own some of those things and say, yes, the church fails to live up to what it's called to be. That said, I would also push back and say that the church does a lot of things for which it doesn't get credit. Yeah. In my country, I can't speak law to Romania, but in my country, there is a growing recognition, even among people who think that Christianity is wrong. I wrote an article recently for the Trib talking about Richard Dawkins. I said, to be clear, Richard Dawkins thinks I'm an idiot, but he increasingly thinks I'm a useful idiot because he now recognizes that secularism is failing. And he called himself a cultural Christian. Briefly, I think he sort of renounced that, but he called himself a cultural Christian because he likes some of the things that the Christian worldview brings, honesty and human dignity and some observance of rule of law and sort of a backdrop against maybe radical Islam. So I think there is a pivot point there. I was in a conversation not too long ago with somebody who I was mentioning that in our country, I think it's inevitable at some point churches will be taxed. We currently aren't taxed, which is a great blessing. It's not to be taken.
Well, that needs a bit of a translation for the Romanian context, because in Romania, there's no such thing as church is not taxed.
Right.
Would you please just briefly tell us what does that mean for the church life?
So we do not pay, it means a couple things. We don't pay property taxes.
Okay.
So nonprofits often don't have to pay property taxes. And people who make donations to churches can take a deduction on the taxes that they owe the federal government.
Okay.
So there's some benefit. It's historically, and it's I think it's going to stop. And I was mentioning this to a friend who is not a Christian, and they said, well, I think churches should be taxed. And I said, okay. But I said, you do understand that we do a lot of things, and it will be harder to do some of these things if we're taxed. And he says, but you just do them for your people. And I said, no. I said, we're building homes for the poor. We host a legal clinic for whoever has need of legal aid. We provide food distribution. We tutor in the public schools, do after-school programs, help students learn how to read. And he goes, but you're only doing this for your members. And I said, no, none of that is for our members. As a matter of fact, if you're one of our members, we probably don't help you in that sense. So I think the church does a lot of things for which it doesn't get credit. So I would say to people who are frustrated with the church, I get it. It's probably better than you think. I'm sorry if we have hurt you, but come back and submit yourself to community. Community is hard, Christian or non-Christian. Getting along, we have a hard time getting along.
And it's getting harder every day. It's interesting how you mentioned Richard Dawkins, and that caught my attention because I sense like Richard Dawkins and people alike despised the church long term. Whereas now, when they see the alternative, they feel like, oh, this could be a good plan B.
Right.
Whereas in God's view, church was not plan B.
Plan B, no.
So that changes the perspective greatly. And I admire how not paying taxes makes you think outwardly, because you as a church need to do things for the world, because that's why you don't get taxed.
Right. To be
So
clear,
if we had that leverage in Romania, we would probably be more open towards doing things outside of the church walls.
well, to be clear, it's only in the last couple of years that thought has ever crossed our mind. So I don't think many people understand it. The reason to serve others, this is Ephesians 2:9, right? Let your good works, do your good works that God has ordained for you to do.
No matter the
foundation of
tax or
world.
not taxed. Yes.
Whether you're taxed or not, and let your light shine that people may see your good works and glorify God in heaven. So I think that when we feel loved and forgiven and granted eternal life, we want to share that, and we also see the need to share that. So I don't pretend to understand the Romanian context, but I do think that as Christ followers, we are called to love our enemies. We're called to love our neighbors. We're called to serve. We're called to go to the end of the line. And it is part of the way God's kingdom gets advertised.
We need to stop a bit here. Aici, Ionuț, dacă trebuie să editezi un pic, ne oprim să mai discutăm un pic ce direcție ia discuția asta. I think so. I just asked them to stop for a bit. So I went through questions 3, 4. Are there reasons to celebrate the church or call people to it? And you started speaking about community.
Okay.
Do you follow that?
Yep.
Point A. Do you want to continue from there on? How do you want this to move?
Sure. I can
here?
say more on community now. Yeah.
Because community makes a difference.
Yep.
And then do you want to build on, if the church doesn't thrive, nothing else will?
Sure.
What might you say to the church in Romania? Unity, holiness, unity. What would you say to pastors?
Okay.
Okay. So this would be the material you had prepared.
Okay. And then we'll go to yours.
And then maybe we go through how do we define success and
Sure.
those differences.
So you want me to talk about community next, and then about if the church doesn't thrive, nothing else will. Okay. I'll hit those two next.
So reaching outside of the church. Okay. So reaching outside of the church through various means of reaching out helps you not only evangelize, not only showing the light of Jesus to your neighbors, to your enemies, but also builds community. Would you please develop that thought, which got our attention?
Well, I think increasingly we're aware that online community is not community, and we have a lot of people who are struggling to have the kind of deep, rich friendships that they can have. And the church is a place where some of those friendships can be formed. So let me, my experience. So 12 years ago, I had a major medical setback. I had a dissection caused by an accident that led to a stroke. And I ended up in the hospital for a month. And I was knocked out for 6 months. And after a couple of weeks, a psychiatrist came in to see me, and he asked a few questions because the stroke that I had, 85% of people who have a stroke, get depressed. So a psychiatrist is assigned to you, and he comes in and he talks to me for a few minutes, and he says, "You're not going to be depressed." And I go, "Really? You talk to me for 5 minutes and you know that?" I'm like, I'm fascinated. Like, I don't understand how psychiatry works, whatever. And he says, "Well, I've been watching you." And he said, you have such a support system. So for starters, the support system was my family. It was my wife. She saved my life, and she was there at the worst time and kept me going selflessly for days and weeks and months. So it was her and it was my boys. But there was also just a parade of people who were there. I tried to keep, when I finally sort of woke up and knew what kind of trouble I was in, I tried to keep where I was, the hospital that I was at, a secret, because I did not want visitors. I was like, I want to be left alone. People found out, and they were caring for us. And the psychiatrist saw this. And he says, I'm in this hospital. This is my job. I don't see this kind of support. And I realized as a pastor, when I go to visit somebody, I go into some rooms and I think, I'm the only person that's going to be here today.
Wow.
And I go into other rooms where calling a pastor was an afterthought. There's their small group. There's the church. And all the needs have been taken care of, right? And their kids are being cared for. And I mean, one of the things one of our boys called at one point and said, "We've got a problem." And I'm like, "Okay, what's that?" And he said, "I don't know how to turn off the food."
Wow, coming your way.
Yes. He said, "The refrigerator is full, the freezer in the garage is full. I'm handing food out to our neighbors. People keep showing up." Now, I'm a pastor. It was a little bit different, but not materially different, right? That's the body of Christ. And over we hear people say, "I don't know how people do it without someone to care for you." And that is, is part of the church. And it's what we try to, we have to cultivate it. We have to be intentional about cultivating it. So I would say to young people, and we're starting to see this in the US. I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week about the hot new place for young people to go is the church. And churches are filling up with young people. We're seeing 3 of our campuses, we have groups of young people that are meeting again. This is post-COVID. And I'm like, oh, what's this about? But it's people looking for real friendships. So I think the church does this, not perfectly, but the church is a source of community. And the other thing I'll say, and this is an argument that was made by Charles Malik, who was a Lebanese diplomat, scholar, PhD from Harvard. He wrote a book in the 80s called A Christian Critique of the University. And his basic premise was that I think he had 7 institutions of society. It was like the family, the church, the family, government, business, education, the arts. Well, he had 7 categories. And he said that if the church doesn't do its job, none of the others can. And in the United States, we have this idea that we're going to be, we have a government that is crafted for religious people. Some of our founders said, it'll only work if people are religious. We cannot hire enough police officers to get people to obey. You have to have people who want to be good.
Yeah.
And when the church is failing, and I think in the 30 years I've been watching this, as the church has suffered and the family has suffered, the state has grown, right? And the state gets bigger and bigger to take over these responsibilities. And you can't, I mean, it doesn't work that way. Like, what would you pay parents to be parents, right? You can't pay them enough. You can't have the state come in and replace the basic institutions of the church and the family. So I think when the church fails, the other institutions are going to struggle, and I think we're seeing that.
Yeah, I think that's a new perspective for our Romanian audience. The way you phrase it from an American perspective, the state versus or with the church towards the greater good.
Yep.
I don't think we have that perspective in Romania. It's the state doing its job, and the church has nothing to do with the state and does not interfere with the greater good of the community. And I think that's an amazing take from your presence here. And what I think you've raised a subject that needs to be discussed more and more in Romanian context.
Well, it's a complicated subject in the United States because we have a separate, it's not in the Constitution, but Jefferson famously talks early on about separation of church and state. And initially that we would not have a state church. Some have taken it to mean much more than that. But in our context, I think the best setting is we understand the state. I mean, Paul, Romans 13, the state is part of God's organization of society, and we need the state, but we need the church to be prophetic to keep the state in check, and we need the church to be prophetic to people to call them to be good citizens.
Yes, we have an extra problem here in Romania because most of our audience watching this interview is from an evangelical setting, Baptist Pentecostal Brethren, independent.
And you have an Orthodox
and
church.
then we have an Orthodox church, which is the majority, which is closely
aligned
with the state on many issues. So how do we navigate that? That's a whole different story. But that being said, when we speak about church, what would you comment on the unity of the church? Because we have universal church and local church, yet unity seems to be forgotten in many options.
Again, Vlad, as you know, such a complicated topic. We are called to unity and we're called to holiness. And one without the other would be easy. If we didn't care about
holiness,
orthodoxy, or anything else, then unity would be easy. And if we didn't care about unity, holiness, you could just go off on your own. And so pulling those two things together is a challenge. I can only tell you how I have tried to work this out myself. Early on, I've been the pastor at Christ Church for I'm in my 26th year. And early on, at the counsel of a mentor who explained a statement of faith as saying, a lot of people think a statement of faith means you have to believe exactly this. But he said, really, what a statement of faith does is it sets up an outer perimeter, and you plant fence posts, and then you try to you connect the fence posts, and you say, this is the outer perimeter of which you can believe. And the more fence posts you have, the smaller the safe space is. You have to have enough fence posts to actually fence in and keep bad out, but you don't want any more than you have to have. And we identified the articles of our statement of faith, just a half dozen. So, the triune nature of God, the authority of Scripture, humans being made in the image of God and having great value, but being fallen, the salvation by grace through Christ is the Son of God, some issues about ecclesiology. But I have largely said, I have opinions about a lot of things. If you're at Christ Church, you may or may not figure out what my opinions are on whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I would say a Cubs fan or a White Sox fan. I just would pick, you use Apple or a PC. I use those as sort of placeholders for more contentious topics, but I try to work broadly with other people who we are aligned around things and try to have a big C idea. I want to see every church. I want to see everybody that is proclaiming the lordship of Jesus grow. And I want to do what I can to help them grow. And that may mean that we disagree on some things, but I'm trying to do what I can to help gospel-centered churches grow.
Thank you. You've mentioned one phrase which caught my attention, and we have this as a topic of our discussion. You would like to see every church grow. Would you define that a sign of success in the terms of U.S. church, may I say? Many churches today measure primarily size, attendance, visibility, and if everything is on plus, that's a successful church. Should we go for it? Should we not? What advice do you have for such questions? Because, the churches in the U.S. are big. Even us from the Romanian perspective, we see that. In Romania, a large church would probably be a few hundred people. So that's considered small in the U.S. So how would you define success, as a matter of fact?
Yeah, so it would surprise most people, I think, listening. The median size of church in the U.S. is about 70 people. But there's just lots and lots of small churches. The average size is larger because you have churches of 10 and 20,000. And his success is big, is successful. So I don't think we can say that that's true because, when I was a college pastor, and I know you work with college students, I used to say, look, if the goal is to draw a big crowd, free beer will work. Like I can get a big group here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've got faithfulness to what we're called to do. So I would argue that you can get a crowd. A crowd is not a congregation. And, there are churches that seem to think putting on the best show is what we're trying to do. That's clearly not correct. I would also challenge some people who are very insular and not seeing anybody come to faith, not seeing people get baptized. I'd say, are you reaching out? Like, are you looking out and reaching out and doing what it needs to be done? And it's hard. As a pastor, I would say one of the hardest things to do is to keep the church looking out. Because what a lot of people want to say is, well, we have to fix ourselves and care for all the needs that we have before we look out. And I'm like, that's never happening.
We're never going to be.
Yes, we have to do both. And in fact, reaching out and serving other people is part of the way we grow and get better. We start to go, oh, you know what? I have a lot to be thankful for when I see other people's struggles. And I actually have a greater sense of life purpose and meaning when I'm serving. And so part of the way we grow is by reaching out. And, Christians are to be sharing the gospel and to be making disciples. So I wouldn't say that big means faithful. I wouldn't say small means faithful. And I was in Germany before I came here. I'm leading a trip for a Reformation tour in October. So Reformation, I was, the church reformed and always reforming. We've always got it wrong somehow. When people tell me, the church has got problems, I want to laugh at them and say, you think I don't know the church has problems? Good night. I work at the church. It's got more problems than you know of. I hide some of the problems from you. That's what I'm doing. Now, I'm not hiding them in the illegal sense.
In a moral way.
Right. But there's lots of problems that are going on in the church. So I don't know how I've headed down that path. But the church needs to always be reforming. Big and small is...
Yes. What I see in our perspective is, if a church is large and presumably successful, something must be wrong. They might hand them sweet candies that people come in those great numbers. And then the other extreme is, but they're not faithful. They're not faithful to the preaching, to the dress code, to the singing and so on. So we have these two extremes. And I think we are missing the point of the discussion, which is reaching out for the purpose of being fruitful. Not successful, not faithful, but fruitful, because we need to bring fruit. And by that we mean we need to reach out, we need to do evangelism, we need to create as many disciples as possible. And when we look outside in order to teach the gospel, make disciples, and baptize them, yes, eventually the church grows, right? But that's a perspective I think somehow lost in the process.
Well, we should be praying, and I assume that the caricature of smaller faithful churches is that they are praying for revival, right? So we need to be reaching out and prayerfully reaching out. It's complicated. It's hard to be a pastor in most settings. Again, I think harder in ways that seem scary to an American pastor to hear about some of the challenges in Romania. Maybe God doesn't look at it quite that same way, but
well, we are in different contexts. We most likely would be able to learn from each other. But you are the guest here, so in the end of our conversation, as concluding remarks, if there's anything you would advise our audience, our Romanian pastors, after drawing from the US experience, your visits to Europe, even to Germany, the always reforming church, give us a few concluding remarks and we'll be very thankful for that.
So I just finished preaching through the book of Revelation, which I had not done in 35 years of pastoral ministry. I preached from Revelation some, mostly what others had done, the 7 churches. And I kept saying, for 30 years, I've been people saying, when are you going to preach through Revelation? And in our context, that can often mean sort of a end of the world, Christ is returning, everything's lining up. There's a lot of that energy. And so I was a little bit nervous of some of that teaching. And I kept saying, one day I'll preach on Revelation. One day I'll preach on Revelation. So at some point I realized, I'm 65 now. I thought, I can't keep saying that like one day. I'm running out of days. Like if I'm going to do this, I need to do it. So it was a 25, 30 week series. And I did some podcasts alongside it and devotions. And so I did a deep dive for a year. It was a year before I did it. It was a study, and then the year of preaching it. And I just want to say, look, God wins, right? Evil is real, but Jesus wins. And it's not even close. Like, when people are like, they're asking, very specific questions. What about the Battle of Armageddon? And I said, the Battle of Armageddon. Yeah, there's a field. And I don't quite know how to put all this together. It's, I believe the Bible is true and authoritative, but this is sort of, the book of Revelation is apocalyptic literature. It's fantasy literature. It's hard to comprehend. But I go, all we get in the Battle of Armageddon is Jesus shows up and it's over. There's no battle. He shows up with his army is dressed for a wedding. His clothes are bloody, but it's bloody from the cross. He's already defeated evil. And so be encouraged. I mean, Revelation 21 and 22 are great to read and to say, okay, Christ has defeated death. He will destroy it. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords will rule and reign. We ought to live today in light of those promises. It is a challenge today to serve and to be faithful, and there's lots of discouragement, but live today in light of eternity, and the brief and momentary sufferings are nothing compared to the eternal weight of glory. So I want to say, to the pastors that are serving, the church planters, people that are involved in ministry, small groups, serving Sunday school, being faithful, yes, keep going. Keep going.
Thank you very much. That's an amazing perspective. We somehow lose sight of the end, which we know how it ends. If only we would think that way, hey, we have to do what we have to do, but we know in the end everything is going to be fine. Fine in God's perspective, not in our perspective, and that's also a challenging thing. Yep. Thank you very much, Mike. This is amazing. Thank you for your visits to Romania. Thank you for your investment in Romanian pastors in the long years after the revolution that shaped our country in ways you probably didn't perceive at that time. And we are thankful. I'll conclude this interview by saying thank you for watching us. Vă mulțumim frumos pentru că ne-ați urmărit conversația. Evident, am dezvoltat câteva subiecte care merită adresate în viitor. Subiectul eclesiologiei, tot ceea ce înseamnă formă, tot ceea ce înseamnă teologia din spatele funcțiile bisericii, toate lucrurile acestea merită investigate, merită studiate, pentru că ceea ce trăim astăzi în Biserica din România se explică și prin felul în care interpretăm Scriptura cu privire la funcțiile bisericii și felul în care ea ar trebui să slujească în societatea în care trăim. Vă mulțumim frumos încă o dată, mulțumim invitatului nostru și sperăm să ne vedem în viitor.